History teaches you where you come from. I want you to know this. I want you to be proud of what we got right and tell the truth about what we got wrong and learn from it. Otherwise, what's the use of tomorrow? If you don't learn, all you've got is today and today and today.
Other generation that will be free. Freedom is coming tomorrow. Amanda! Amanda! Maibule! The Africa!
What you've just seen there is a short film collating some of the scenes from that old movie, Sarafina. Incredibly powerful stuff. We'll speak to the producer announcing later. Reviving some of those scenes from Sarafina to celebrate the courage of the class of 1976, and join us a bit later in the show when we will be speaking to him about that project. Now, today is Youth Day, when South Africa remembers those events of June the 16th, 1976. Young people altered the course of history when they rose up in protest against the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in schools. And of course, those protests began in Soweto and spread. Students were met with fierce brutality. It's believed that hundreds were killed. Those in the international community who were not already convinced that apartheid had to come to an end finally sat up and took notice. So, of course, since then, a new era of democracy has been ushered in. It is a very different time, different struggles, but nonetheless huge struggles for young people today. Not least the fact that South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates for young people, for everybody, in fact, in the world. Now, let's look at young people specifically, over 63% for people aged between 15 and 24. So that means out of every 10 young school leavers, not even 4 will be able to find jobs. That has implications because they will not gain the experience they need and find it increasingly difficult to enter the labour market over time. Today we bring you a June the 16th youth panel focusing on issues such as unemployment. We're joined now by Tessa Dooms, Commissioner for Youth Development at the National Planning Commission. We're joined by Kristal Duncan-Williams, Project Leader for Youth Capital. That's a project incubated by the DG Murray Trust. Raymond Matalala, founder and CEO of the South African BRICS Youth Association. And we're also joined by Kgotsi Chikane, who is an author, an Oxford graduate and a commentator on South African politics. Mr. Chikane, let me start with you, because I suspect you're a lot younger than me, and you do represent the South African dream for young people, the dream of attaining education. You have a global education, Ivy League, kind of big stuff, coming home, looking at the politics here. But what makes you different? What allowed you to achieve that when so many young South Africans just cannot get a leg up? And are there any lessons in what you've experienced in the past few years?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I guess I haven't asked that question that way before, but I guess the easiest way to answer it is pure luck of being born in one of the nations that this country encapsulates, not the other, right? If you have that two-nation theory of South Africa, that there's one nation that exists that allows people to climb up an economic ladder, and there is another nation where the vast majority live in where that's just not an opportunity. And I just happened to be born into a family, into an economic situation that allowed me to climb that ladder. But furthermore, that allowed me to further take advantage of the opportunities made available to me that wouldn't be made available to ordinary South African. So my dream, or my life essentially, is the exception to the rule that faces the majority of young South Africans in the country, right? So even if you said that I went to Oxford and I went to UCT and I work at WITS now, that isn't the story of how everyone would experience life, the opportunities that it was given. Now, the question that we must ask ourselves is, why should those opportunities be privileged for a certain minority of the country?
Yeah.
Right? Why should it be ring-fenced around a particular group of the country and not made available to the majority of the country? And if you figure that out, it's one step towards figuring out the unemployment question in our country as well.
And if only we could, but very quickly, staying with you, in light of what you've said, can you comment on what the President was saying? Young people should take the future into their hands, start businesses, things like that. Not so easy for somebody on in that second economy that you're discussing.
Yeah, so I think, so I disagree with the President in the sense of, if you say that you must let young people kind of run their lives, then you should really allow them to do it and not really care too much about consequences of it and how they go about demanding some sort of change. But the other flip side of the coin is, in order for young people to be employed, you need an economy that generates some sort of activity for young people to participate in. Right? You can't create an economy or create circumstances within an economy that doesn't generate economic activity within a sector that demands labor. Right? It's fine if you generate an economy that focuses on the financial sector. It's fine if you have an economy that focuses on the mining sector. But both those sectors, which contributed to GDP growth over the last quarter, don't contribute to labor-intensive employment growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So the President has a bit of a fork in his tongue to an extent. Right? You can't say one thing on the one side saying, young people, please get active, and then on the other side have a government that isn't really generating economic activity that allows us to participate.
Yeah. All right, let me go over to Ms. Dooms, Commissioner for the National Planning Commission. Government saying, well, the President saying that young people are at the center of its strategic planning, but the numbers don't seem to attest to that. Do you agree?
Yeah, certainly young people have not been part of government strategic planning very much. In the role that I used to hold as in the Planning Commission, we've now ended our term. We were only 2 people who were under the age of 35 that were brought into the Planning Commission in the last iteration, and we hope to see more young people sitting in strategic planning positions. But even if you look across government, if you look at the age of cabinet, if you look at the age of director generals, if you look at the age even of deputy ministers, you just do not see young people being taken seriously and brought into the frame when it comes to policy making. And the truth is that if over 66% of this country is under the age of 35, that means every problem in this country is a youth problem, and every solution has to be focused on young people under the age of 35. But if we continue the way we are, we do not allow ourselves to be led by young people. We do not allow ourselves to let young people into the decision-making rooms. We are losing on many opportunities, the opportunities of learning from young people's experiences. And I can tell you as a youth practitioner, the things that I know about youth policy, the majority of them I've learned sitting with young people in their communities, learning about their experiences. Youth in this country are the experts on youth. And for as long as we treat young people as some kind of marginal minority that have to sit somewhere in some sort of youth league structure on the side, and we don't think of them as the lead.
All right, we've lost Ms. Dooms. That is so insightful, not including young people in the National Planning Commission. Maybe that has had consequences. Ms. Dooms, you're back. We only lost the last part of what you were saying. But can we extrapolate then? So if young people are not part of the Planning Commission and strategic planning, look at the age of ministers often commented on. So it doesn't seem like we have young people being brought in as the experts, as you say.
Yes, we certainly across government losing out on that opportunity. I think there's a lot of ways in which our politics is stifled by people, standing in queues as opposed to us thinking about who are the most best placed to understand South Africans' problems and to solve for them. If we look at the business sector, we see young people leading, we see young people getting into the boardrooms, we see young people starting their own businesses, and we celebrate that. When we look at academia, we see many scholarships opening up for PhDs and trying to attract younger people into academia and intellectual spaces. But the only place where we seem to not value young people is in governance and politics. And that's the place where they're needed the most, because it's their experience that can guide us into the better kind of South Africa that we need, that doesn't reflect, like Kgotsi said, that one South Africa, but reflects the real South Africa, the one that is inhabited by these young people who need the solutions.
All right, let's bring in Ms. Matalala, founder and CEO of the South African BRICS Youth Association. You can comment on young people being involved if you'd like to. And of course, you then take a broader view. So this is about BRICS. BRICS, is it falling apart? Lots of issues around Brazil right now, India with their COVID-19 struggles. It seems to have gone back to the rhetoric about Chinese dominance rather than this grouping that South Africa was part of, is part of. Do you still believe that there could be a collective international effort that can help South African young people? Mr. Matalala, unmute yourself. Okay, thank you.
Maybe let me jump into the issue of inclusion. My mic is on unmute. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, carry on, please.
Yeah. Let me quickly jump on to the issue of inclusion, and I would like to agree with Tessa on this one, because what we've been fighting for, or what we've been advocating for as youth, is that bring youth into the table, let them make their decisions, because
Mr. Matalala, I'm terribly sorry to do this. I'm going to have to cut you off because you are almost inaudible. We'll see if we can fix that problem with your mic, the connection to us. But let me move to Ms. Duncan-Williams. So project lead for Youth Capital, that's incubated by DG Murray Trust. So is this the business sector getting involved? Explain how it works.
Hi there. So Youth Capital is a long-term campaign that looks at bringing together the lived experiences of young people, the evidence and research, and bringing this around an elective agenda for youth unemployment. We really believe that the reason why we've been unable to shift the needle on youth unemployment is, as my fellow panelists have said, young people have been completely left from the conversations on solutions. They've been top-down, they've been driven by government, who really don't understand what it's like to be a young person in South Africa in 2021. And secondly, that a collective plan for addressing the challenges that young people face, one that covers their entire journey from education all the way through to employment. There hasn't been a holistic plan. We again hear the president speaking today about all these initiatives and all these targets, but how do they all come together, looking at the entire journey of a young person? You know, it's fine for the president to say young people start businesses, but when a basic education system is failing young people, you know, that very first step they have to be able to access education isn't working, then I think it's really unfair for the president to put the ball in the young people's court, so to speak.
Yeah, but are other initiatives beyond government working? We know there's the Yes campaign, so you're involved in this campaign. Businesses have been called on to give young people a chance. Just let them get their foot in the door. Is anything else happening beyond government?
So, the Yes initiative is government-led. It's working with the private sector, but it's another government-led initiative. And, you know, at its inception, it promised to create 1 million jobs in 3 years, and yet to date has only created 50,000 opportunities. I think these targets speak to a disconnect between what business and government think is possible, and then really understanding what that looks like at an implementation level. And we see government making the same mistake over and over again of starting initiatives without first understanding what is happening in the sector. If you look at the Basic Employment Education Initiative, there are other NGOs working within YES who have been having general assistants and education assistants placed in school through the YES program, who have best practices already, who have models that can be copied for the government intervention, yet that wasn't done when this initiative was launched. So we had people, young people, you know, get a stipend for 4 months, and now they're all sitting at home, once again unemployed. And so what has this opportunity really done for young people? We need to start thinking long-term about how these initiatives go beyond the immediate term and actually help young people in the long term to create a career path for themselves.
All right, Mr. Chikane, let me move to you because I'd like to know now from all of you what the solutions are. And maybe you can comment what a guest said recently on the show, that government is not supporting young people with real entrepreneurial ideas, the people who invent things, saying that those funding initiatives basically treat somebody the same, whether they're starting a spaza shop or want to start a global IT venture. And these are young black kids with no resources at all. Any comment there?
Yeah, so I mean, I would partially agree with them. So I would first say that I think one of the problems that we have is that when we think about employment and we think about unemployment, we often detach that from where young people are unemployed, right? So it is not the sense that the majority of young people are unemployed in Sandton, for instance, right? So if you talk about someone creating a small business, you're talking about them creating a business within their community. Then the question then becomes, where do their clientele come from? Where does the demand for whatever they're generating coming from? And it loops back to the amount of economic activity. Now, that is not to say that young people must kind of sit and wait for the economic growth of the country to boom, but it does pose this question of how does the country take advantage of one of its biggest comparative advantages, something that looks like a weakness, right? The idea that youth unemployment being super high is a weakness in our economy. But on the flip side, it's the question of there is, if you take NEET, for instance, there is 3.3 million young people between 15 and 24 who are unemployed, not in education, not in training. That looks like it is bad, but on the flip side, it is 3.3 million people who could contribute to the country. And the question then becomes, how do you match what business needs? How do you match the labor market? Or how do you change the labor market? Often we look at business as this panacea that will solve all our ills as business who want to hire people, but businesses aren't in the business of hiring people. They want to make profits. So the government needs to ask the question for itself is, if the labor market is not swallowing up these young unemployed individuals, what interventions do we need to make in the labor market that does that for them? And furthermore, how do we capacitate young people with the skills? If you fail them at basic education, which we've done already, so we can't help people who have been failed by the system, how do you then capacitate them with the skills after the fact to take advantage of gaps in the labor market in which they could find employment or generate their own entrepreneurial activities?
But give some more practical examples. What must government be doing if businesses aren't in the business of picking up unemployed youths?
Yeah, stop doing the extended public works program would be one of the first steps. The idea that if you employ someone for 6 months, that is good enough, and then you let them go back into unemployment again. If you do any sort of government-focused job intervention scheme, whether it's SEPA 1 million, whether it's the YES program, the jobs that they have to find have to be based off, if I get into this job, I am employed for the next 2 years, and these are the tangible outcomes. And I think one of the mistakes that government makes is that, and I love the word of job opportunities. I think it's the biggest fallacy in the world, right? Stop using the phrase job opportunities. Give people an opportunity, give people a job that lasts more than 6 months with clear, tangible skill sets that they must gain at the end of that year or 2 years, and rather deal with that. You might not hit every single young person in the economy, but the young people that you do impact will be more economically active in our communities and our society, and I think those programs would be more successful than what we have currently.
Ms. Dooms, would you like to comment on that? You were involved in strategic planning, and of course the big blueprint at one point for this country was the National Development Plan. There's this idea that people would start new businesses, that they would employ many people, including young people, that there would just be an explosion of economic growth, and it hasn't happened. Since then, we've had a gazillion plans. If the NDP was implemented as its authors envisaged, do you think we could be in a different position right now?
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further to say that as the Planning Commission responsible for implementation, we did provide government with a working paper that presents some solutions, some that have been taken up, but in very piecemeal ways, and others that have not been taken up yet. But I think just to extend on what Kgotsi said, I think one of the things we need to tackle is what I call the youth unemployment industry in this country, which is a lot of youth employability programming that is short-term, that is unaccountable, that uses a lot of money for the way in which the operation runs, but puts very little money in the hands of young people themselves and seeks to benefit the private companies through the tax incentive systems and BEE. I think we need less money going to companies and organizations and more money going into the pockets of the young people so that they have, number one, more money so that they can seek for long-term sustainable employment, and more money that they can plow into their own business initiatives. There are two other solutions that, as the Planning Commission, we put forward.
All right, I'm going to stop you there because, as you can see, we're running out of time on the link, and we are going to say goodbye to some of our guests. We're going to see if we can fix the sound with Mr. Matalala. All right, today on Youth Day, we are commemorating the courage of the young people involved in the June 16th uprising against apartheid education, against Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in schools, and what the young people did facing those apartheid police. Also, our panel, let's turn to that, looking at the struggles of young people today, and of course the biggest one, unemployment, just finding it difficult to secure a future, to put food on the table. One of our panelists, we were struggling with his sound, so we've got him on the telephone, Raymond Matalala, founder and CEO of the South African BRICS Youth Association. And Mr. Matalala, my question to you earlier was, is the BRICS grouping still relevant? You know, we know a lot of these countries have internal issues like Brazil and India at the moment. Is this still relevant for South Africa, and is there a global collective view that could impact the lives of South African young people?
Thank you very much. Indeed, look, BRICS is still relevant, and we believe that through the other BRICS channels, we will be able to change the multi-order in terms of the multipolar world that we seek to achieve. And I'll give you an example. We look at the BRICS Bank, and the BRICS Bank is still quite young, but it is providing some infrastructure funding. In fact, it provided funding for South Africa, for India, and I think Brazil, in terms of loans during the COVID-19 pandemic fight against that. And of course, we have, like any other structures, there is conflict and there are challenges. But what I like about BRICS is that it works on consensus. Therefore, those conflicts are then get resolved through discussions and diplomatic channels.
All right, thank you. And stay with us. Let's return to our female guests on the panel who have to leave shortly, starting with Ms. Dooms, who's a former commissioner for the Youth Development Development at the National Planning Commission. And we've been talking, Ms. Dooms, about the lack of young people involved in strategic planning in South Africa. You were agreeing with Kgotsi Chikane that maybe these youth opportunities, these job opportunities are great. They're short-term without long-term implications. So before you go, just continue to tell us what you believe are some possible solutions.
Yeah, I think there are two solutions that, as the Planning Commission, that we did put forward. The one is rethinking the demand side of the youth market issue. A lot of interventions are focused on the young people and getting them ready for the job market, not on getting the job market ready for young people. We do not have youth-friendly employers who are ready to train young people, to take them up, to have a kind of an apprenticeship model that really grows young people in organizations and teaches them more about business, so that when even if they venture out their own businesses, they understand how business works. And so we need to look at the ways in which businesses are structured. We need to look at the ways in which businesses are staffing, so that we have spaces that are looking for young people and want to bring them in, as opposed to blocking young people every opportunity. And then the second one is to look at the social economy. We have so many young people across this country who work in their communities every day. They are there as young people, as community workers, as community leaders, as people in the social sector. but we do not value the social sector enough, and we're not seeing enough jobs being created in NGO spaces where young people are already active. If we start to value young people where they are, we start to already solve a lot of the unemployment crisis. And see young people do what the president is saying. They're already working their communities tirelessly. Let us go to where they are and value what they're doing rather than ask them to do things that what we want them to do on our terms.
Duncan-Williams from Youth Capital, project lead there. Do you believe that business can become more young people friendly? And you can add your last words on solutions.
Absolutely. I think what business need to realize is if they want to have customers 10 years from now, then you need to create a workforce of young people who have money back into the economy. We need to invest in young people now to avoid more intergenerational cycles of poverty and unemployment, which we're already seeing. And so it's really in the best interest of everyone for us to solve this youth unemployment crisis. Businesses need to realize that young people need the opportunities to get the work experience, to find a pipeline where they can get a set of skills, as has already been said on the panel, that takes them towards a career choice, instead of what's happening where we give young people, like has been said already, these short opportunities and young people are jumping from one to the other because they're desperate for an income, instead of having a system that helps young people to string all these short courses, short stints of work into something that actually is a meaningful career path. And so in closing, just to say that we really need to look, all of us in the sector, civil society, people working with young people themselves in government, and say we need to really all come around the table, and each of us have a skill and a voice to add to this conversation, and we need to really listen and start learning from our mistakes and not repeating them. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Duncan-Williams. And Kgotsi Chikane, you were talking about this earlier, saying these job opportunities are too short. They should be at least 2 years. A government that's complaining about money for even government workers, is this viable?
So it's not viable if government is becoming the employer of choice, right? So if government takes on the role of we will become the largest, as they are, employer of people in the country, you run into a bit of a trap there, because if government starts failing, if government's coffers are running dry, you're running into a big trap in that situation. I think the real focus needs to be around how do you generate, again, I come back to this word economic activity, where young people can employ themselves or can find jobs within our economy, whether that is in corporate, whether that's in civil society, but in a space in which they get income, and when they get income, they can plow their income back into the economy in a virtuous cycle. And I think, as Kristal stated, and it's really an important point, if you don't fix the unemployment problem for young people right now, we're not going anywhere. It's not like we're all going to pass away miraculously and then a new generation of young people. We go from being 25, 26 to becoming 35, 36 to becoming 45, 46. We become constant consumers in our economy. If you deny us the opportunity to get jobs, to get skills, this has a cascading effect over the next 20 years, where in 20 years from now, the demand that we're looking for from a booming economy won't come because we don't have young people, or at that point, we don't have fully adulthood citizens, if we had to use that phrase, who are actively participating with their skills in the economy. Yeah. So it becomes a systemic challenge if we don't solve this problem now.
And it's always said the youth bulge, this huge young population we have, like you said, is either a risk for the country or something that is a great opportunity for the future. But just practically, again, there are incentives for businesses to employ young people. A lot of initiatives. Why are they not working?
Yeah, so it's a complete labor market skills mismatch. And in government's defense, government made an active decision in the mid-2000s where they said, through a program called ASGISA and GIPSA, for those who remember that developmental framework we used to have, where they said we need to create young people with employable skills. And out of that came this boom of FET colleges, right? So I love the narrative of we need more artisans in the country. You know, the more artisans we have, it's a metaphor for hard skills that people can have that they can push back into the economy. What we've now subsequently found out over the past 15 years is that there's a huge mismatch with the skills that government thought would generate economic activity and the skills and the demand for skills in the actual labor market. So there has to be a firm retweaking, and this happens in spaces such as NEDLAC, where the discussions at NEDLAC have to fundamentally unpack what it means to have this skills shortage. The hard policy decisions that have to be made by departments that deal with SMMEs have to focus on what that skill gap looks like. And then you say in practical terms, what skills do we need to teach at basic education from grade 8 onwards? What skills do we need to teach in tertiary education, right? Throw away the idea that government, and I say this with hesitancy, right? Because government does a lot of good work, but you need to park the idea that government should be the employer of choice for young people, because it's an easy scapegoat argument for government. And what government needs to do is say, what is our role as a facilitator in merging the gap that exists between the available skills that we have amongst young people and the skills that are demanded by the labor market? Now, programs such as YES try to do this, yet fail in certain respects. Because it's too dominant on giving business an incentive to hire young people who doesn't have the skills for that job, right? So it takes a little bit of ingenuity to an extent. Another practical example of this would be asking the question of what jobs need to be created, right? And you do the analysis and the numbers are there. And then you actively ask the question of what would it take for business to hire these individuals? At that point, you can have a conversation about incentives and subsidies, but you can't just make it a blanket approach across multiple sectors and hope that you strike lucky. It has to be purposeful.
Okay, so it has to be around the skills needed. Let's bring in Mr. Matalala again, the CEO of the South African BRICS Youth Association. Firstly, you mentioned the BRICS Bank. Is that doing anything in terms of providing funds for young people specifically? And is there any opportunity here to share skills amongst countries to allow young people to move? It's always said that capital can move, labor is stuck, South African young people are stuck in South Africa. Any opportunities in the BRICS?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, and the question that you're raising is the question that we've been pushing, that we need the new development bank to start focusing on funding youth activities. If you look at our policy recommendations from civil society 2018 South Africa, we explicitly note that at the moment, what the BRICS Bank is focusing on is on infrastructure development, particularly among the countries. But of course, in terms of opportunities, we as young people are working together to creating an opportunity. And I'll give an example. We have established what we call the BRICS Chamber of Commerce and Industry Young Leaders. And we've just started with the work in all the 5 BRICS countries, initially founded in India, but in South Africa, we've been working for the past 4 months now around how do we, facilitate intra-BRICS trade among young people in particular. And to that end, we brought in a number of stakeholders here, civil society, business, government, and academia, as a steering committee for South Africa in order to try to come up with ways and practical, issues that, practical exercises that we can utilize as the BRICS youth, population on how can we, open up those intra-trade amongst BRICS youth.
Thank you very much, and we're going to say goodbye to Raymond Matalala. He is CEO of the South African BRICS Youth Association, and on your screen there you can see the Russian leader Vladimir Putin talking. This is amongst the meetings with the United States, with Joe Biden, his counterpart from the US, and some of their associates in Europe. We'll take you live there, but very quickly let's end with Kgotsi Chikane, who have been trying to solve the problem of youth unemployment in South Africa with. Finally, we were talking about governments struggling financially right now and being a huge employer in terms of government workers and saying that it can't even afford to increase those salaries for the next 3 years. I don't know if you saw, but the SANDF, I think it was reported that they were that was affecting intern positions. So young people not getting opportunities because older people are being kept in jobs. What do you do with a difficult situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a new situation. It's not one that is unique to our country in any particular way. The question then becomes, if it is not new, how have other people kind of solved it? And one of the quickest ways to solve it is you find new markets for which young people can enter. One of the biggest new markets that we have across the world is around that notion of ICT, the capabilities of, I hate the phrase, but of the fourth industrial revolution, for instance. But with that comes teething pains, right? And that change has to be managed. How you don't create that problem is by giving useless contracts to people who are not doing their job, right? And not keeping people on for the sake of keeping them on because the processes dictate it. It requires government to say, well, how do we change our processes to get a bigger bang for buck? So you stop the process of having older individuals staying in jobs that are not necessarily required anymore. But that creates problems that is beyond the scope of our discussion now. If you solve that, right, so you solve the end line, then you look at the pipeline and you say, what new activities can we get young people in, right? Instead of getting them to replace those who are already in jobs that are not necessarily doing anything for government. And in that space, you're starting to look at the telecommunications, ICT. You're looking at brand new forms of manufacturing, right? There's the scope that we have available to us is only limited by the imagination of our economy. And at some point, we need to have a conversation of what are the new opportunities that we want to take advantage of, and how do we then fully invest in that and take the risk and take the gamble? There's no country that had a huge amount of economic growth, whether it's the Southeast Asian tigers, whether it is China, whether it is European countries who came out of this whole Soviet Union bloc, Estonia being a good example of them, of taking a risk and saying, let us delve into new areas of industry. Right? And let's fully invest in it and let's take the risk. South Africa hasn't really done that. We've relied on our age-old industries of manufacturing, mining, and the newcomer to the block being the financial sector. And outside of that, we really haven't tried to create anything new. And I think that's where government should focus on if they really want to get young people in without generating another bulge of older workers who are stuck doing jobs that are not necessarily productive for the country.
All right. Well, thank you for trying to grapple with this problem tonight, being part of our Youth Day panel, and to the other guests as well. That was Kgotsi Chikane, author, Oxford graduate, and commentator on South African politics. Now let's bring up